My husband Darren brought his secretary Kelly to our family dinner, introducing her as his executive assistant. 2 days later, I sat silently at the head of the boardroom table as the same secretary announced budget cuts to his department. "We'll need to eliminate redundant positions," she said confidently. Darren nodded in agreement, not noticing my nameplate on the door he'd walked past. When I finally spoke, the blood drained from his face as he realized who now controlled his career. The crystal glasses clinked too loudly in the awkward silence of our dining room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My mother, ever the perfect hostess, kept the conversation flowing, despite the tension crackling between me and the unexpected guest at our table. "And how long have you been working with Darren, Kelly?" my mother asked, delicately cutting her roast beef. "Almost 2 years now," Kelly replied, her smile practiced and professional. "Though the last 6 months have been particularly productive." The way her eyes flickered to my husband did not escape my notice. Neither did the way he shifted in his chair, suddenly very interested in rearranging his potatoes. "Stephanie doesn't mind that I brought Kelly," Darren interjected, not bothering to look at me. "We have a major presentation tomorrow, and the Jefferson account is crucial to the department's growth strategy." "Of course," I said, taking a measured sip of wine. "The Jefferson account. You've mentioned it before." Frequently, in fact. Usually as his excuse for late nights at the office and missed anniversaries over the past 6 months. "Kelly has been instrumental in putting together the pitch," Darren continued, his hand briefly touching hers before quickly retreating. The gesture was small, easily dismissed as accidental, but I had become an expert at noticing these moments. "I'm sure she has," I replied evenly. My father cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with my mother. They both knew what I knew, though Darren remained oblivious. "So, Stephanie," my father said, changing the subject, "how was your trip to Chicago?" "Productive," I answered, echoing Kelly's choice of word. "The board was quite receptive to my presentation." "Board?" Darren perked up, finally looking at me. "What board?" For 10 years of marriage, my husband had shown minimal interest in my career. I was, in his mind, a middle manager at a financial consulting firm. Competent enough, but not ambitious like him. Not on track for leadership like him. Not deserving of the same respect he demanded for himself. "Meridian Global's board of directors," I explained, watching confusion flicker across his face. "Why would you be presenting to them?" he asked, his tone suggesting I'd misspoken. "Stephanie was asked to interview for a senior position," my father said, unable to contain his pride despite our agreement to keep things quiet until the official announcement. "Oh," Darren said dismissively, turning back to Kelly. "The Jefferson portfolio has potential annual billings of nearly 7 million. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My mother touched his hand in a silent request for patience. "What?" Darren didn't know, what his self-absorption had prevented him from discovering, was that Meridian Global had just acquired Westbrook Financial, the company where he'd worked for the past 8 years. The company where he'd recently been promoted to regional director, a position he'd leveraged to hire Kelly despite her questionable qualifications. And what Darren certainly didn't know was that after 6 months of confidential negotiations and interviews, I had been appointed as Meridian's new CEO. As dinner continued, the conversation drifted to safer topics. My mother's charity work, my father's golf game, the unseasonably warm weather. I contributed just enough to appear engaged. While my mind worked through tomorrow's strategy, Darren and Kelly occasionally exchanged glances they thought were subtle, their knees touching under the table when they thought no one was watching. When dessert was served, my mother's famous apple tart, I excused myself from the table. "Need to prepare for an early meeting tomorrow," I explained, folding my napkin neatly beside my barely touched dessert. "Don't wait up," Darren called after me, not bothering to turn around. Kelly and I will be finalizing the presentation details. Might be a late one. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the tableau. My husband leaning slightly toward his secretary, my parents exchanging concerned glances, the remnants of our family dinner scattered across the table. "Good luck with your presentation," I said. "I have a feeling tomorrow will be quite revealing for everyone." In the guest bedroom, I'd been sleeping there for weeks, though Darren hadn't seemed to notice. I reviewed my notes for tomorrow one final time. The acquisition had been finalized last week. My appointment had been confirmed yesterday. Tomorrow would be my first official day as CEO of Meridian Global, overseeing 12,000 employees across 3 continents, including my husband and his executive assistant. I heard Darren leave around 11, the front door closing with its characteristic click. He didn't come to say goodbye, probably assuming I was already asleep. I continued working until midnight, then set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. Tomorrow would require all my focus. The next morning, I dressed carefully in the charcoal suit I'd purchased specifically for this day. Conservative enough to convey authority, modern enough to signal change was coming. I left before Darren returned home, leaving only a note saying I had an early meeting. The drive to Meridian's headquarters took 30 minutes, giving me time to mentally prepare for the day ahead. At 6:30 a.m., I nodded to the security guard who recognized me from the previous month's visits. The executive floor was quiet, most senior staff not expected for another hour or two. I used this time to review personnel files and department restructuring plans one final time. By 8:45 a.m., my new office had been arranged to my specifications. The large mahogany desk positioned to face the door rather than the window, family. Photos conspicuously absent, credentials and awards prominently displayed. My assistant, Penelope, briefed me on the day's schedule. "Department heads will begin arriving at 9 a.m. for introductions," she explained. "Westbrook leadership is scheduled for this afternoon." "And Regional Director Wellington?" I asked, using Darren's title and surname as I would for any executive. Penelope consulted her tablet. 3:15 p.m., with his executive assistant. "Perfect," I replied. "Please ensure there are no interruptions during that meeting." The morning proceeded as expected. Most department heads were professional, if surprised to see a woman in her late 30s as their new CEO. Some were visibly concerned about what my leadership might mean for their departments. All were appropriately deferential. By 3 p.m., I had met with 14 executives. I took 15 minutes to review my notes on Darren's department one final time. At precisely 3:15, Penelope's voice came through the intercom. "Regional Director Wellington and Ms. Kelly have arrived for their appointment. Send them in," I instructed, positioning myself behind my desk, back straight, expression neutral. The door opened, and Darren walked in confidently, Kelly trailing behind him. He was wearing his navy power suit, the one he considered lucky, and carrying the leather portfolio I'd given him for our anniversary 3 years ago. He didn't notice me at first, his eyes scanning the impressive office before landing on the large desk where I sat reviewing documents. "We're here to meet the new CEO," he announced, his tone suggesting the CEO should feel honored by his presence. "I'm Darren Wellington, Regional Director of Investment Strategy at Westbrook." I looked up slowly, allowing the moment to unfold, at my pace. "Hello, Darren," I said calmly. His expression transformed from confident to confused to shocked in the span of 3 seconds. "Stephanie, what are you doing in the CEO's office?" "I am the CEO," I replied, gesturing to the nameplate on my desk, as of yesterday morning. The look on Darren's face was worth every moment of the past 6 months. The late nights researching Westbrook's financials, the weekends spent preparing presentations, the uncomfortable questions about my sudden interest in corporate restructuring. His perfectly crafted facade crumbled as realization dawned. You're my boss now?" he stammered, his confident posture deflating visibly. I'm everyone's boss now. I corrected him calmly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Please, both of you, sit down. We have the quarterly restructuring to discuss. Kelly sank into a chair immediately, her survival instincts clearly sharper than my husband's. Darren remained standing, his mind visibly racing to process this new reality. Restructuring? He finally managed, color slowly returning to his face. But our department is exceeding targets. The Jefferson account is projected to bring in $7 million. Yes, I finished for him. I've reviewed the projections. They're optimistic. Too optimistic, according to our risk assessment team. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a detailed analysis of Darren's department, including performance reviews, budget allocations, and personnel decisions for the past 2 years. You'll find some concerning patterns highlighted, I continued, my voice measured and professional. Particularly regarding recent hires and resource allocation. Kelly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfectly manicured nails suddenly fascinating to her. Darren still hadn't moved to take the folder. I don't understand, he said, his voice finding some of its characteristic confidence. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? About Meridian? About the acquisition? The question contained multitudes. Why didn't you tell me about your new job? Why didn't you warn me? How could you ambush me like this? I considered him for a moment. This man I had lived with for a decade, who had gradually dismissed my career, as secondary to his who had brought his mistress to my parents' house last night. Why would I? I asked simply. You never asked. Something in my tone finally penetrated his shock. He sat down slowly, reaching for the folder with a hand that wasn't quite steady. This is a mistake, he said, flipping through the pages without really seeing them. There must be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I replied, was your assessment of our respective positions, both professionally and personally. My intercom buzzed discreetly. Ms. Wellington, Mr. Connor from Legal is here with the restructuring documents you requested. Send him in, I instructed, not taking my eyes off Darren. The door opened to reveal Connor Matthews, Meridian's veteran chief legal officer, carrying a leather portfolio similar to Darren's but considerably more worn. At 62, Connor had guided Meridian through 3 decades of growth and acquisitions. His presence lent gravity to any meeting. Mr. Wellington, Ms. Miller. Connor nodded to them before taking the seat beside my desk. I have the documents you requested, Ms. Wellington. Thank you, Connor, I said, accepting the portfolio. We were just discussing the redundancies identified in Mr. Wellington's department. Connor's expression remained professionally neutral, though I detected a flicker of sympathy as he glanced at Darren. Unlike my husband, Connor had recognized my potential from our first meeting 6 months ago. The board has approved the restructuring plan, Connor explained to Darren. As you know, acquisitions often necessitate organizational changes to eliminate overlapping functions. Darren straightened in his chair, his business instincts finally overriding his personal shock. My department has the highest growth rate. At Westbrook, surely that counts for something. Growth without proper oversight is just risk, I countered, opening Connor's portfolio. Your department expanded by 37% last year, while your compliance reviews dropped by 22%. That's not sustainable. Kelly finally spoke, her voice carefully modulated to project competence. I've been implementing new efficiency protocols that reduce the need for traditional compliance reviews. It's all documented in our quarterly reports. Yes, I've reviewed those protocols, I said. They're innovative but untested. Meridian has stricter compliance standards than Westbrook. We'll need to realign your department accordingly. I removed a document from the portfolio and placed it before me. This brings us to the immediate changes. Effective today, all executive. Assistants with less than 3 years' experience and without relevant degrees will be reassigned to administrative pools. Kelly paled visibly. Her resume had claimed a business degree from Wellesley College, a credential that our background check had discovered was fabricated. Furthermore, I continued, all department heads will undergo a 90-day evaluation period. Those meeting Meridian's leadership standards will retain their positions. Those who don't, I let the implication hang in the air. Darren finally found his voice again. This is personal, he accused, his tone hardening. You're using your position to punish me for what, exactly? I interrupted, my gaze unwavering. Please, enlighten us. Connor shifted slightly beside me, a subtle reminder of the professional environment. Darren glanced at him, then at Kelly, whose wide eyes clearly communicated a warning to tread carefully. For not taking your career seriously enough. Darren amended, opting for a safer grievance. This isn't about you, Darren, I said, though we both knew otherwise. This is about Meridian's future. The board expects me to optimize operations and eliminate redundancies. I'm simply doing my job. I slid the document across the desk. You have 2 options. Option 1. Accept a position as senior analyst, reporting to the new director of investment strategy, whom we'll be bringing in from our Chicago office. Option 2. A severance package, generous by industry standards. And Ms. Miller? Darren asked, his concern for his assistant suddenly paramount. Will be meeting with HR after this to discuss her options, I said evenly. Her situation is different from yours. The implications hung in the air. Falsifying credentials was grounds for immediate termination at Meridian. The only reason I hadn't mentioned it explicitly was professional courtesy, and the knowledge that Darren's humiliation would be more complete if he discovered it later. Connor cleared his throat. I should mention that both options include standard non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses. Meridian values discretion during transitions. Darren stared at the document, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. I need time to consider my options. Of course, I replied. You have until the end of the week. In the meantime, you'll both report to Paige Morris, who will be overseeing your department during the transition. As if on cue, the intercom buzzed again. Ms. Morris has arrived for her 4 p.m. appointment. Perfect timing, I said, rising from my chair to signal the meeting's end. Connor will walk you through the paperwork, and I'll introduce you to Paige. Darren and Kelly stood, visibly shell-shocked. I couldn't help adding, oh, and Darren, don't wait up tonight. I'll be working late. The irony of using his own excuse against him wasn't lost on anyone in the room. 3 weeks earlier, I had forgotten my laptop charger at the office and returned after hours to retrieve it. The executive floor was deserted, but a sliver of light escaped from under Darren's door. I approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt if he was on a call. She has no idea, I heard Kelly whisper, her voice intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. Once the Jefferson deal closes, we'll have enough leverage to restructure the entire department. Darren's laugh, low and conspiratorial, was one I'd never heard before. Dad's retirement was the opening we needed. The old man finally stepped aside, and now the board is practically begging me to take over his accounts. I froze, hand suspended, mid-knock. Through the partially open door, I saw Kelly perched on my husband's desk, her skirt hiked inappropriately high, her fingers tracing patterns on Darren's chest as he stood between her knees. And Stephanie? Kelly asked, pronouncing my name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. She's served her purpose, Darren replied casually. She was useful when I needed a stable family man image for the board, but once I'm running things, we'll have more flexibility in our arrangements. You mean I won't have to hide in hotel rooms anymore? Kelly pouted playfully. Soon enough, Darren assured her, his hands sliding up her thighs. Though I admit, there's something exciting about sneaking around. Something broke inside me that night. Trust, love, the illusion of a 10-year marriage. But something else hardened in its place as I slipped away unnoticed, leaving my laptop charger behind. I drove home in a daze, streets blurring through unshed tears. When Darren returned hours later, I pretended to be asleep, buying myself time to think. For the first time in our marriage, I was grateful we'd kept separate financial accounts, my prudish insistence that had annoyed Darren over the years. The next morning, I moved mechanically through our routine, making coffee, checking emails, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. I now saw the subtle patterns I'd been ignoring, the late nights, the unexplained expenses, the way he'd gradually undermined my career while elevating his own. "Big meeting with the Jefferson people today," Darren mentioned casually over breakfast, not looking up from his phone. "Probably won't be home until late." "That's fine," I replied evenly. "I'm having dinner with Finn anyway." That got his attention. Finn Murray was my college boyfriend, now a successful management consultant. Our occasional lunches had always irritated Darren, though he pretended not to care. "Finn? What's he doing in town?" Darren asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "His firm is handling a major acquisition. We're just catching up." I hadn't actually made plans with Finn, but the seed was planted. As soon as Darren left, I called my old friend. "Stephanie." "It's been ages," Finn greeted warmly. "How are you?" "I need your help," I said, skipping pleasantries. "And your discretion." Over lunch in a quiet restaurant far from Darren's usual haunts, I explained my situation without emotion, laying out facts rather than feelings. "So, your husband's cheating with his secretary. Classic, but disappointing," Finn summarized. "But why call me specifically? Unless—" His eyes widened with realization. "The acquisition your husband mentioned. Is it Westbrook?" I nodded. "Meridian Global is looking to expand into Westbrook's market. The deal's been kept quiet." Finn leaned back, impressed. "And you want in on it?" "I want more than that," I replied. "I want to run it." For years, I'd been building a reputation in financial consulting, specializing in corporate restructuring, identifying inefficiencies, streamlining operations, maximizing shareholder value. My clients respected my work, even if my husband dismissed it as a hobby job. "Meridian's CEO is retiring next month," Finn said thoughtfully. "They'll need someone who understands both cultures to manage the transition." "Someone like me," I confirmed. "I need you to get me a meeting with Paige Richardson." Paige was Meridian's board chair, known for her no-nonsense approach and commitment to promoting qualified women. She'd built Meridian from a regional player into a national powerhouse. "It won't be easy," Finn warned, "especially keeping it quiet from Darren." "I've kept his secrets for years," I said coolly. "Now I'll keep my own." The next day, I began documenting everything, copying files from our home office, photographing financial statements, recording conversations when legally permissible. If I was going to take control, I needed leverage. I also started sleeping in the guest bedroom, claiming insomnia was disrupting Darren's sleep. He barely noticed, too preoccupied with the Jefferson account and Kelly to register the growing distance between us. A week later, Finn called. "Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m., the Westlake Club." "Who else will be there?" I asked, recognizing the exclusive venue where major deals were often negotiated over perfectly cooked steaks. "Just Paige Richardson and Connor Matthews, Meridian's chief legal officer." I spent that evening preparing, reviewing Meridian's public financials, analyzing Westbrook's vulnerabilities, developing a preliminary integration plan that would showcase my understanding of both companies. When I entered the private dining room at the Westlake Club the next evening, Paige Richardson rose to greet me. In her mid-60s, she exuded the quiet confidence of someone who had broken glass ceilings without making a show of the shattered pieces. "Mrs. Wellington," she said, her handshake firm. "Finn speaks highly of your capabilities. though he was deliberately vague about your interest in Meridian. I appreciate his discretion, I replied, taking a seat across from her. And I've admired your leadership for years. Connor Matthews, Meridian's silver-haired legal counsel, studied me with practiced neutrality. Your husband works for Westbrook. Correct. That presents certain complications. I placed a folder on the table. Inside, you'll find evidence of irregularities in Westbrook's reporting, particularly in my husband's department. The Jefferson account that's being used to justify his promotion is built on projections that can't be substantiated. Paige opened the folder, scanning its contents with a raised eyebrow. You're willing to provide this information against your husband's interests? I'm willing to protect Meridian from a bad investment, I corrected, and to offer my services in restructuring the acquisition properly. As what, exactly? Connor asked. I met his gaze directly. As your next CEO. The audacity of my proposal hung in the air. Then Paige Richardson did something unexpected. She laughed, a genuine sound of delight. You have guts, Mrs. Wellington. That's essential for the position. She glanced at Connor. We'll need to move quickly and quietly. If your husband discovers our interest, he could undermine the entire acquisition. He won't, I assured her. Darren only sees what he expects to see, and he's never expected much from me. As dinner progressed, my temporary alliance with Finn evolved into a genuine partnership with Paige and Connor. By dessert, we had outlined a strategy that would transform both companies and my life. Welcome to Meridian, Stephanie, Paige said, as we parted. Though I suggest we keep your new position confidential until the papers are signed. I nodded, a plan already forming. Absolutely. Some revelations are best delivered in person. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in our home office, a space Darren rarely entered, and methodically developed my strategy. The desk lamp cast shadows across family photos that now seemed like artifacts from a stranger's life. 10 years of marriage reduced to props in a play where I'd unknowingly been cast as the devoted wife while my husband rehearsed a different script altogether. My laptop glowed with a half-completed email to Finn, detailing additional documents I needed from Meridian to prepare for my first week as CEO. The position wasn't officially mine yet, the board would vote next week, but Paige's support virtually guaranteed my appointment. The timing aligned perfectly with the Westbrook acquisition. I closed the laptop and moved to the window, watching dawn break over our neighborhood of carefully curated executive homes. The irony wasn't lost on me. Darren had insisted on buying in this prestigious address to reflect his professional standing, using mostly my inheritance from my grandmother for the down payment. Now that same house would witness his professional downfall. Strategic patience, my grandmother had always counseled. Know when to move and when to observe. Growing up in her household after my parents' death, I'd absorbed her business acumen through osmosis. The granddaughter of Penelope Wells, founder of Wells Financial Services, I'd been raised to understand power, particularly the power of being underestimated. Grandmother had sold her company at 65, having built it from nothing while being consistently dismissed by her male counterparts. Let them think you're harmless, she'd advised. It gives you room to maneuver. I'd followed that advice throughout my marriage, allowing Darren to believe his career naturally took precedence, that my work was secondary. I'd kept my accomplishments modest in his presence, redirected conversations when colleagues praised my insights too enthusiastically at company functions. It hadn't started as a deliberate strategy, more an unconscious adaptation to Darren's fragile ego. Somewhere along the way, his perception of me had calcified into certainty. Stephanie, the supportive wife. Stephanie, the adequate but unexceptional professional. Stephanie, who would never outshine him. I heard Darren's alarm from the master bedroom, followed by the shower running. He'd emerge in exactly 17 minutes, dressed in one of his rotation of power suits, expecting fresh coffee and perhaps a perfunctory kiss before heading to the office where Kelly awaited. Today, I would disappoint him on at least one count. Gathered my papers and slipped out the front door before he finished his shower. The note I left was brief. Early meeting. Don't wait up. His own words returned to him without acknowledgement of their regular dishonesty. In my car, I allowed myself a moment of genuine emotional response, not the calculated calm I'd maintained since overhearing Darren and Kelly, but the raw hurt of betrayal. 10 years. A decade of building a life with someone who could dismiss it so casually. Who could look at me across our dinner table with Kelly beside him, pretending everything was normal? The hurt crystallized into something harder, colder, more focused. By the time I pulled into my office parking lot, I had compartmentalized my personal feelings. Today was about professional preparation. The reckoning would come later. I spent the morning finalizing details with my soon-to-be former colleagues, carefully avoiding any hint of my impending departure. At lunch, I met with Finn at a cafe near Meridian's headquarters. The board vote is scheduled for tomorrow, he confirmed, sliding a folder across the table. This arrived from Paige this morning, your official offer. I scanned the document, CEO of Meridian Global, effective immediately following the vote, with compensation that made my current salary look like pocket change. More importantly, it included specific authority over the Westbrook integration, including staffing decisions. Has Darren suspected anything? Finn asked, keeping his voice low despite the privacy of our corner booth. Not a thing, I replied. He's too focused on his promotion to notice mine. And when he finds out? I closed the folder. He'll understand that actions have consequences. After lunch, I returned to my office to find a text from Darren. Working late with the Jefferson team, don't wait up, I replied with a simple, okay, resisting the urge to add more. Let him have this last night of believing he controlled our narrative. At home, I packed essentials into a small suitcase, enough for a week at the downtown hotel Meridian had arranged near their headquarters. I wasn't fleeing, I was positioning myself for what came next. Living under the same roof as Darren would be untenable once everything was revealed, at least temporarily. As I placed the suitcase in my car trunk, our neighbor Connor waved from his driveway. Weekend getaway, Stephanie? Just a work trip, I called back with a practiced smile. Connor and his wife Paige had been our neighbors for 5 years. They'd hosted us for barbecues, celebrated holidays together. I wondered briefly how they'd react when neighborhood gossip inevitably reached them. The Wellington marriage imploding spectacularly alongside Darren's career. That night, alone in our house, I walked through rooms filled with memories now tinged with doubt. Had anything been real? Or had I been living in a carefully constructed fiction, seeing what I wanted to see rather than what was actually there? In our bedroom, I opened Darren's closet, running my hand across suits I'd helped select, ties I'd given as gifts, the material evidence of our shared life. On impulse, I checked the inside pocket of his navy suit, the one he considered lucky, for important meetings. Inside was a small jewelry box. For a moment, hope flickered irrationally. Perhaps I'd misunderstood. Perhaps there was an explanation that didn't destroy everything we'd built. I opened the box to find a delicate silver necklace with a small diamond pendant. Expensive, but not excessively so. Perfect for a mistress, not a wife. The card tucked inside confirmed what I already knew. For Kelly, something beautiful for someone beautiful. Counting the days until we can stop hiding. D. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, a strange calm settling over me. The last lingering doubt had been removed. Tomorrow would bring revelation and consequence. Tonight required rest and preparation. In the guest room, I changed into pajamas and set my alarm for 5 a.m. I needed to be at Meridian before the board meeting at 7:30. By 9, I would officially be CEO. By afternoon, Darren would walk into my office expecting to meet his new boss and find his wife instead. Strategic patience, I whispered to myself, echoing my grandmother's wisdom as I drifted toward sleep, and then decisive action. Long before I became Stephanie Wellington, or even contemplated a career in finance, I was Stephanie Wells, granddaughter of Penelope Wells and heiress to a legacy few people knew about. My grandmother had built Wells, financial from nothing in the 1970s, fighting sexism and skepticism at every turn. As one of the first female-owned financial advisory firms in the city, Wells Financial had specialized in helping other women manage their money at a time when most couldn't even open a credit card without a husband's signature. Money is power, grandmother had told me repeatedly during my childhood. Not the having of it, but the understanding of it. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, I'd moved into grandmother's elegant brownstone. There, amid antique furniture and leather-bound ledgers, I received an education no private school could match. While my friends learned geometry and literature, I absorbed lessons on capital markets, investment strategies, and the subtle language of corporate negotiation. "Watch how they dismiss me in meetings," grandmother would say after bringing me to her office on school holidays. "Then watch their faces when I demonstrate I know more than they do." By 18, I knew I would follow in her footsteps. By 22, I had my finance degree and was working on my MBA. By 25, I was handling my own small portfolio of clients at a respected firm. Then I met Darren Wellington at a financial conference in Chicago. He was 30, ambitious, and charismatic, a rising star at Westbrook Financial with family connections and an effortless confidence I found both attractive and slightly intimidating. Our courtship was swift and exhilarating. Within 6 months, he'd proposed with a diamond ring and promises of a partnership, personal and professional, that would benefit us both. What Darren didn't know was that I had quietly inherited Wells Financial upon my grandmother's retirement. Rather than taking over directly, I had accepted the board's recommendation to install professional management while maintaining majority ownership as a silent partner. The arrangement allowed me to pursue my career without the weight of my family, name-creating expectations or resentment. Only my close friend Finn knew the full extent of my financial situation. "Are you sure about not telling Darren?" he'd asked before the wedding. "Starting a marriage with a secret this big seems risky." "I'll tell him," I'd assured Finn. "Just not yet. I want him to know he's marrying me, not my grandmother's company." But the right moment never seemed to arrive. Early in our marriage, Darren had made dismissive comments about trust fund babies who hadn't earned their positions. Later, he'd grown increasingly competitive about our respective careers, subtly undermining my accomplishments while exaggerating his own. By our 3rd anniversary, I had decided to maintain my privacy indefinitely. My grandmother, still sharp, at 82, had approved. "Men like Darren need to feel superior," she'd observed during one of our monthly lunches. "Your success threatens him. Your inheritance would devastate him." So I'd played the role of supportive wife, maintaining a separate but successful career path that never quite overshadowed his. I'd offered insights when asked, connections when needed, and occasional capital infusions disguised as family money when opportunities arose. The most significant of these had come 5 years into our marriage when Darren needed investors for a new division he was creating at Westbrook. I'd provided $200,000 through a shell company grandmother had established years earlier, becoming an anonymous limited partner in a venture my husband considered exclusively his achievement. That investment had helped launch the division that now included the Jefferson account, the same account he was using to position himself for promotion, while conducting an affair with Kelly. The irony wasn't lost on me. My money had inadvertently funded the vehicle for my own betrayal. 3 years ago, grandmother had passed away at 87, leaving me as the sole heir to her considerable estate and complete control of Wells Financial. By then, maintaining My financial privacy had become second nature. Darren knew I'd inherited some money and property, but I deliberately downplayed the amount while moving the bulk into trusts and investment vehicles outside his awareness. What I hadn't anticipated was Meridian Global's interest in expanding their market share through strategic acquisitions. 6 months ago, they had approached Wells Financial, not knowing its connection to me, about a potential partnership. The synergy between Wells' boutique advisory services and Meridian's broader financial operations was compelling. During initial discussions, it became clear that Meridian was also considering Westbrook Financial, my husband's employer, as another potential acquisition target. The coincidence had seemed almost cosmic, a convergence of personal and professional worlds I'd kept carefully separated. Rather than recusing myself from the negotiations, I'd seen an opportunity. Using a different last name, my mother's maiden name, Taylor, I'd participated in preliminary meetings with Meridian executives, impressing them with my intimate knowledge of both Wells Financial and, through carefully anonymized insights, Westbrook's operations. When Paige Richardson, Meridian's board chair, had mentioned they were also seeking a new CEO to oversee their expansion strategy, I'd recognized the perfect alignment of circumstance and preparation. My unique understanding of all three organizations made me an ideal candidate. The only complication was my marriage to a Westbrook executive, a conflict of interest that would need to be addressed. If I were to pursue this position, I'd asked Paige during a private dinner, how would you handle the Westbrook acquisition, particularly regarding existing leadership? Performance reviews would be standard, she'd replied. We retain the best talent and restructure where necessary. No special treatment, regardless of connections. Her eyes had narrowed slightly. Why do you ask? That night, I'd made my decision. I would pursue the Meridian CEO position as Stephanie Taylor, revealing my Wells Financial connection, but temporarily withholding my relationship to Darren Wellington. Once the board approved my appointment, I would disclose the potential conflict of interest, but recuse myself from direct decisions regarding his position. What I hadn't anticipated was discovering Darren's affair with Kelly before my appointment was finalized. That changed everything. The professional courtesy I'd planned to extend no longer seemed warranted. As I prepared for tomorrow's board vote, I reviewed the careful compartmentalization I'd maintained throughout my life. Wells heiress, anonymous investor, supportive wife, ambitious professional. For the first time, all aspects would converge in a single moment when Darren walked into my office tomorrow afternoon. The thought brought not anxiety, but a strange sense of relief. The masks were coming off. The strategic patience my grandmother had taught me was about to yield its dividend. We don't need lazy people like you, Darren said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. Beside him, Kelly maintained a professional facade, but the triumph in her eyes was unmistakable. The boardroom scene unfolded in its entirety, every excruciating detail now crystal clear in the harsh fluorescent lighting of Meridian's executive floor. Your services are no longer required, Darren continued, barely looking up from the document in front of him. Kelly will oversee the implementation of your suggestions for the Jefferson account with appropriate modifications. The subtext was clear. My work would be claimed as Kelly's, just as my husband had been. I studied the faces around the table, some avoiding eye contact, others watching with nervous anticipation. The department heads Darren had invited to witness my professional execution had no idea they were instead about to observe his. We're streamlining operations, Kelly added, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. The severance package is generous considering your contributions. I didn't touch the folder. Is that all? Darren finally looked up, momentarily confused by my lack of emotional response. He'd expected tears, perhaps, or anger, something that would confirm his narrative of me as unstable and unprofessional. My calm demeanor clearly unsettled him. Security. We'll escort you out, Kelly said with poorly concealed satisfaction. That won't be necessary, I replied, standing smoothly. I know my way around this building quite well by now. Connor Matthews, who had been silently observing from the far end of the table, caught my eye with the slightest nod. The legal counsel knew what was coming. He had helped orchestrate it. "One question before I go," I said, pausing at the door. "Does Finn know about this meeting?" A flicker of unease crossed Darren's face at the mention of my longtime friend. "Finn is no longer with the company. His position was eliminated in the restructuring." Another lie. Finn had accepted a position as Meridian's new chief strategy officer the same day I'd received my CEO offer. His firing had been a carefully constructed fiction to prevent Darren from connecting the dots too soon. "I see," I said, allowing a small smile. "Good luck with the Jefferson presentation. I'm sure Kelly will handle it adequately." With that parting shot, I walked out with the quiet dignity grandmother had instilled in me through years of watching her navigate male-dominated boardrooms. I strode past curious stares, past the office I'd occupied as a departmental consultant, past the security desk where Archie gave me a subtle thumbs up instead of the escort Kelly had ordered. In the elevator, I pressed the button for the top floor. Executive Territory Darren. Had visited but never conquered. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of him emerging from the conference room, his expression confused as he watched me ascending rather than leaving the building. Penelope met me as the elevator opened, her tablet ready with updates. The board meeting concluded 20 minutes ago. The vote was unanimous. "And the press release?" I asked, walking briskly toward my new office. "Scheduled for 11 a.m. Your official introduction to the executive team is at 2 p.m., followed by department head meetings." She handed me a folder. "These are the files you requested on Westbrook's senior management." "Thank you, Penelope. Please let Connor know I'd like to see him before lunch." My new office was everything a CEO's domain should be. Corner views of the city skyline, elegant furnishings that conveyed authority without ostentation, and most importantly, my name on the door. Stephanie Wellington, Chief Executive Officer. I positioned myself behind the desk, taking a moment to absorb the culmination of decades of preparation, both conscious and unconscious. Grandmother would have appreciated the symmetry, her lessons in strategic patience yielding such perfect results. Connor arrived promptly, closing the door behind him. "Congratulations, Stephanie. Or should I say, Ms. Wellington?" "Stephanie is fine, Connor. We'll be working closely together." He nodded, taking a seat across from me. "I observed the meeting downstairs. Your husband was quite emphatic about your termination." "Ex-husband," I corrected. "The papers were filed this morning." Connor raised an eyebrow. "Efficient." "I believe in addressing problems promptly," I replied. "Speaking of which, when is Darren scheduled to meet the new CEO?" 3:15 p.m. He and Ms. Miller are preparing their presentation on the Jefferson account. Connor's tone remained professional, but a hint of satisfaction crept in. "They're unaware that their meeting has been escalated to include you, Paige Richardson, and myself." Perfect. I opened the Westbrook file, scanning the personnel evaluations my team had compiled. "And the verification of Kelly's credentials? Completed this morning. As you suspected, her degree from Wellesley is non-existent. She attended for 1 semester before dropping out." I nodded, unsurprised. "Grounds for immediate termination under both Westbrook and Meridian policies." "Indeed." Connor hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The Jefferson account projections your husband presented to the board last month? They're substantially inflated. Our analysts found discrepancies suggesting deliberate manipulation of the numbers." This gave me pause. Professional misconduct crossed a line beyond personal betrayal. "How severe?" "Severe enough to constitute fraud if it can be proven he knew the projections were false when he presented them." Connor placed another folder on my desk. "This contains the evidence we've gathered so far." I felt a momentary pang of something like sympathy for Darren. He had always prioritized appearance over substance, taking shortcuts to achieve the success he felt entitled to. Now, those shortcuts would cost him everything. "Thank you, Connor. I'll review this before the meeting." After he left, I spent the next hour preparing, not just for the confrontation with Darren, but for the leadership role I'd officially assumed today. The merged organization would need clear direction and decisive action to navigate the transition. At 1:45 p.m., Penelope buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Richardson has arrived for the executive team introduction. Please send her in, and have the team assemble in the main conference room." Paige Richardson entered with the confidence of someone who had built a financial empire from the ground up. At 65, she conveyed authority without effort, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her tailored suit a statement of professional precision. "The board is extremely pleased with your appointment," she said, extending her hand. "Particularly after learning about your connection to Wells Financial. Penelope Wells was a legend in this industry. She taught me everything I know," I acknowledged. "Though I suspect today's lesson wasn't one she anticipated." Paige's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Personal and professional reckonings happening simultaneously. That's either cosmic justice or extraordinary planning." "Perhaps a bit of both," I admitted. "Shall we meet the team?" As we walked to the conference room, Paige lowered her voice. "Your husband's department is problematic beyond the Jefferson account. The acquisition team found several instances of questionable hiring practices and misallocated resources." "I'm aware," I replied. "The situation will be addressed this afternoon." The executive introduction went smoothly, my new colleagues responding well to the clear vision I outlined for Meridian's expansion. Only one question hinted at the drama unfolding beneath the professional surface. "How will you handle conflicts of interest regarding Westbrook personnel decisions?" asked the CFO, clearly aware of my marriage to a Westbrook executive. "With complete transparency and appropriate recusals where necessary," I responded. Though I should note for the record that my marriage has recently ended, eliminating one potential conflict. The subtle murmurs that rippled through the room confirmed that today's events would provide fodder for corporate gossip for months to come. I didn't mind. In my experience, a certain mystique enhanced leadership authority in the early days. As the meeting concluded, I checked my watch. 2:55 p.m. 20 minutes until Darren would walk into my office, expecting to meet his new boss. 20 minutes until the masks came off completely. At precisely 3:15 p.m., Penelope's voice came through the intercom. "Regional Director Wellington and Ms. Miller have arrived for their appointment." "Please send them in," I instructed, positioning myself behind my desk, back straight, expression neutral. I heard them before I saw them. Darren's confident voice, explaining something to Kelly in the hallway, their footsteps approaching my door. The nameplate would be their first clue, but in my experience, people rarely noticed such details when focused on important meetings. The door opened, and Darren walked in with the same self-assured stride he'd used in the boardroom earlier. Kelly followed close behind, tablet in hand, her professional mask firmly in place. Paige Richardson and Connor Matthews were already seated in the visitors' chairs, creating an unexpected, welcoming committee. Darren hesitated briefly at seeing the board chair and chief legal officer, but quickly recovered. "Ms. Richardson, good to see you again. I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." His eyes moved past them to where I sat behind the desk, and everything stopped. For 3 long seconds, he simply stared, his brain struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. "Stephanie," he finally managed, "what are you doing in the CEO's office?" "I am the CEO," I replied calmly, gesturing to the nameplate on my desk. "As of this morning." The color drained from Darren's face as realization dawned. Behind him, Kelly's eyes widened in alarm, her gaze darting between me and the exit as if calculating her chances of escape. "This isn't possible," Darren said, his voice hollow. You work for Bennett Consulting. I did, I confirmed, until Meridian recruited me 6 months ago as part of their leadership transition strategy. 6 months? His shock was giving way to anger now. You've been planning this for 6 months and never said a word? Much like you never mentioned your relationship with Kelly, I replied evenly. We all have our secrets, it seems. Kelly took an instinctive step backward, but Connor's subtle shift to block the door discouraged any hasty departure. Please. Both of you, sit down, Paige instructed with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This meeting is still happening, just with some adjusted parameters. Darren sank into a chair, visibly struggling to process this reversal of fortune. Kelly perched on the edge of her seat, poised for flight. I believe some context might be helpful, I said, opening a folder on my desk. Especially regarding how we arrived at this particular moment. I removed a document, the original certificate of ownership for Wells Financial, bearing my grandmother's name and signature. 35 years ago, Penelope Wells founded what would become one of the most respected boutique financial firms in the region. What most people didn't know was that she created it after being passed over for partnership at Westbrook Financial, the 7th female candidate rejected in as many years. Darren's eyes fixed on the document, recognition slowly dawning. Wells? Financial? Your grandmother was that Penelope Wells? The very same, I confirmed. When she died 3 years ago, I inherited controlling interest in the company. A fact I chose not to share with you for reasons that have become increasingly obvious. 6 months ago, Paige continued seamlessly, Meridian approached Wells Financial about a potential acquisition. During those discussions, we discovered Stephanie's unique position. Intimate knowledge of Wells' operations, an understanding of Westbrook's culture through her marriage to you, and impressive credentials in her own right. Connor leaned forward, slightly. When the CEO position opened unexpectedly, Stephanie became the obvious candidate to oversee the integration of both acquisitions. Darren's expression hardened as the pieces fell into place. So this whole time, while I was working to advance at Westbrook, you were secretly positioning yourself to take over the entire company? No, I corrected him. I was building my career independently, maintaining the separate identity my grandmother established for me. The opportunity with Meridian emerged organically through my work at Wells. The timing was fortuitous. Fortuitous? Darren's laugh was bitter. You've been lying to me for our entire marriage. About your family, about your finances, about everything. Have I? I asked quietly. Or did you simply never bother to ask? You assumed I was a middle manager with a hobby job, as you called it. You never showed interest in my work, my ambitions, or my background beyond the convenient narrative you created. Kelly, sensing the personal turn of the conversation, attempted to redirect. Perhaps we should focus on the Jefferson account presentation. That is why we were called here. An excellent suggestion, Ms. Miller, Paige agreed. Though I should mention that the Jefferson projections have already been thoroughly reviewed by our analytics team. The numbers don't quite add up. Connor opened his own folder. Specifically, the revenue projections appear to be overestimated by approximately 40%, while implementation costs are underreported by a similar margin. This creates a significantly distorted picture of the account's profitability. Darren's confidence faltered again. Those projections were prepared by my team based on available data. If there are discrepancies, the discrepancies appear to be systematic and deliberate, Connor interrupted, his tone neutral but firm, which raises questions about oversight and intent. Kelly shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I merely compiled the data provided by the department analysts. Interesting, I noted. Because, according to timestamps on the digital files, the final edits were made from your company laptop at 11:32 p.m. on April 15th, a time when department analysts were unlikely to be involved. April 15th. The night I'd overheard them in Darren's office, planning their future at my expense. The night everything had changed. Darren's expression confirmed my suspicion. He knew exactly when and how those projections had been modified. His eyes darted to Kelly, a warning she failed to heed. "Darren instructed me to adjust the numbers," she blurted. "He said the board needed to see stronger growth potential to approve his promotion." The betrayal between them was swift and absolute. In an instant, their united front collapsed under pressure. "That's not," Darren began, but Paige raised a hand to silence him. "These are serious allegations that will require formal investigation," she said firmly. "In the meantime, Meridian has clear policies regarding conflicts of interest, financial misrepresentation, and personal relationships between managers and direct reports." I removed 2 documents from my folder. "Which brings us to the immediate changes. Effective today, all executive assistants with falsified credentials will be terminated immediately." I slid the first document toward Kelly, who paled visibly. "Your resume claimed a business degree from Wellesley College. Our background check confirmed you attended for exactly 1 semester before withdrawing. That constitutes grounds for immediate termination under both Westbrook and Meridian policies." Kelly's carefully constructed professional facade crumbled. "You can't." "I can and I am," I stated firmly. "Security will escort you to HR to process your departure." As if on cue, Archie from security appeared at the door. With a final desperate glance at Darren, who refused to meet her eyes, Kelly gathered her belongings and followed Archie out. The second document remained on my desk, its implications hanging in the air between me and the man I'd married a decade ago. "And me?" Darren finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. "I suppose you've been planning my termination since the moment you accepted this position." I studied him for a moment. This man who had dismissed my career, betrayed my trust, and attempted to humiliate me professionally just hours earlier. "Actually," I said, "I have something else in mind." I opened the second document and placed it in front of Darren. It wasn't a termination notice as he clearly expected, but something potentially more devastating to his pride. "This is a reassignment order," I explained. "Effective immediately, you'll be transferred to our Seattle office as a senior analyst reporting to Paige Morris, who will be taking over your former department during restructuring." Darren stared at the document in disbelief. "You're demoting me? After everything I've built at Westbrook?" "You're being offered a position commensurate with your verified accomplishments," I corrected. "The Jefferson account irregularities have called into question your judgment as a department leader." "This is personal," he accused, anger flaring. "You're using your position to punish me." "On the contrary," Connor interjected smoothly. "Ms. Wellington recused herself from the final decision regarding your position. This recommendation came from our integration committee based on performance metrics and compliance concerns." This was partially true. I had recused myself formally, but the committee understood my preferences. The decision to offer Darren a position rather than outright termination wasn't mercy, it was strategy. "The alternative," Paige added, "is immediate termination with cause, which would trigger an investigation into the Jefferson account projections. That could potentially lead to more serious consequences, including industry blacklisting." The pie implication hung in the air. Financial fraud wasn't just a firing offense. It could end his career permanently and potentially involve legal repercussions. Darren's eyes narrowed as he calculated his limited options. "And if I refuse this? Generous offer?" "Then you'll be terminated immediately," I replied evenly. "The severance package would be minimal given the circumstances, and Meridian would be obligated to disclose the reason for your dismissal to future employers who inquire." Darren leaned back, his expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? Was this your plan all along? Marry me, learn the business, then take over and destroy me?" I felt a flicker of genuine anger at his attempt to rewrite our history. "Our marriage was real to me, Darren. If you recall, I was the one who discovered you with Kelly, not the other way around. His momentary confusion confirmed what I'd suspected. He had no idea I'd overheard them that night in his office. 3 weeks ago, I continued, I forgot my laptop charger and returned to the office after hours. Your door was partially open. I heard everything. Your plans for after the Jefferson deal, your assessment of my usefulness, your arrangement with Kelly. Understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by defensive anger. So this is revenge for an affair? Pretty extreme, don't you think? This isn't about the affair, I said, my tone measured. It's about consequences for choices you made professionally and personally. The affair simply removed any reason for me to extend professional courtesy. Connor cleared his throat discreetly. We should note that the reassignment offer expires at the end of business today. Given the sensitive nature of the financial discrepancies involved, we need your decision promptly. Darren's jaw tightened as the reality of his situation sank. The power dynamic he'd taken for granted had been completely upended, leaving him with only bad options. Fine, he said finally. I'll take the Seattle position. Excellent, Paige responded, sliding a pen toward him. Initial here and sign. At the bottom. The transfer takes effect next Monday, giving you time to make necessary arrangements. As Darren signed with barely controlled fury, I opened my desk drawer and removed a final document. Divorce papers already processed by my attorney that morning, 1I. Last piece of business, I said, placing them beside the reassignment form. Given the circumstances, I believe a clean break is appropriate. Darren's laugh was bitter as he scanned the divorce filing. Efficient as always, Stephanie. Were these prepared before or after you took the CEO position? The position and our divorce are separate matters, I replied, though I admit the timing is convenient. He signed without further comment, his signature angry and sharp against the paper. Connor will see you out, I said, gathering the signed documents. HR will contact you tomorrow with relocation details. As Darren stood to leave, a flicker of his old confidence returned. You know, you're more like your grandmother than I realized, ruthless when necessary. Thank you, I replied sincerely. That's the highest compliment you could give me. After Darren and Connor left, Paige remained, studying me with newfound respect. That was impressively handled. 10 years of marriage taught me exactly how to manage Darren, I said, allowing myself a small smile. His pride would never let him refuse the position, even at a lower level. Termination would have made him a martyr in his own mind. This way, he has to live with the consequences every day. And sending him to Seattle? That was particularly inspired. It's our smallest office, furthest from headquarters, with the least growth potential. Darren will hate every minute of it. Paige nodded approvingly. Remind me never to get on your bad side. After she left, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, yet I felt no triumph, only a strange emptiness where anger had burned just hours before. I walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline as afternoon shadows lengthened. The office that had been Darren's ambition and my inheritance now represented something different. A fresh start, professionally and personally. My intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. Ms. Wellington, Finn Murray is here to see you. Send him in, Penelope. Finn entered with the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. I heard the meeting with Darren went as planned. News travels fast, I observed as he set the glasses on my desk. Corporate grapevine, he confirmed, opening the champagne with practiced ease. Kelly apparently made quite a scene in HR. Something about conspiracy and entrapment? I accepted the glass he offered. She'll find another position. People like Kelly always land on their feet. And Darren? Seattle, I replied. Effective Monday. Finn raised his glass. To new beginnings. I clinked my glass against his. And hidden protections. As we sipped our champagne, I found myself thinking of my grandmother. She had built her company after being rejected by Westbrook, creating a legacy that ultimately enabled me to acquire the very institution that had dismissed. Some might call it revenge. Grandmother would have called it market correction. Either way, the symmetry felt right. A circle closing after decades. Justice delivered not through confrontation, but through strategic patience and decisive action when the moment arrived. What? Now? Finn asked, interrupting my thoughts. I smiled, setting down my glass. Now we build something better. Through a series of vignettes that played in my mind as I looked out over the city from my new office, I could trace the evolution of my relationship with Darren, from genuine connection to growing distance. 10 years ago, we'd met at a financial technology conference in Chicago. I was there representing my small client base at Bennett Consulting. He was already a rising star at Westbrook. Our connection had been immediate. Both ambitious, both passionate about modernizing financial services, both certain we were destined for greater things. You're different from the other consultants, he'd said during our first dinner. You actually understand the fundamentals, not just the buzzwords. In those early days, Darren had valued my insights, often bringing me complex problems from work to get my perspective. When I suggested solutions, he'd implement them, proudly telling me later how his supervisors had praised his innovative thinking. We make a great team, he'd say, kissing me as we celebrated his successive promotions with increasingly expensive champagne. The warning signs had been there from the beginning, but love, or perhaps ambition, had blinded me to them. The way he gradually began presenting my ideas as his own, the subtle dismissals when I achieved my own successes, the increasingly frequent suggestions that I should consider a less demanding career track once we decided to have children. You're already doing so well at Bennett, he'd say when I mentioned pursuing a director-level position. Why stress yourself with more responsibility? Our wedding had been lavish, Darren's preference, not mine. I'd wanted something intimate. He'd insisted on impressing his business associates and family connections. 300 guests, most of whom I barely knew, witnessed us exchange vows, in a ceremony that felt more like a networking event than a celebration of love. The photographs from that day showed a beautiful couple, his confident smile, my measured happiness. What the camera couldn't capture was the subtle shift already occurring between us, the gradual repositioning of our relationship from partnership to hierarchy. Our third anniversary marked a turning point. Darren had been passed over for promotion. At Westbrook, beaten by a colleague who'd secured a major client that Darren had been pursuing for months. If you'd consulted me on the pitch, I'd offered gently, reviewing his presentation later, I could have helped strengthen these projections. His response had been unexpectedly harsh. Not everyone needs to be rescued by their wife, Stephanie. Some of us prefer to succeed on our own merits. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. He'd been using my insights for years while maintaining the fiction that they were his own. But something in his tone that night signaled a change. Our professional lives, once intertwined in productive collaboration, began separating into distinct spheres. By our 5th anniversary, we'd settled into patterns that preserved peace at the expense of intimacy. I focused on building my client base at Bennett while maintaining my silent partnership in Wells Financial. Darren pursued increasingly aggressive expansion strategies at Westbrook, determined to secure the executive position he believed he deserved. When he needed additional investment for his new division, I'd arrange the funding through one of my grandmother's old shell companies, allowing him to believe it came from an anonymous venture capital group impressed by his business plan. I told you I'd make it without nepotism or connections, he'd said proudly after securing the financing. Pure merit and vision. I'd smiled and congratulated him, understanding that his ego required this fiction. The truth, that his success, was built partially on my capital and completely on my silence about my contributions, would have been intolerable to him. After my grandmother's death, our relationship cooled further. Darren expressed appropriate sympathy, but showed little interest in my grief or the responsibilities I'd inherited. When I mentioned receiving some property and investments from her estate, he'd nodded distractedly, too preoccupied with a potential promotion to inquire about specifics. "We should use some of that inheritance to renovate the kitchen," was his only substantive response. "The outdated countertops are killing our home's value." The distance between us grew, measured not in arguments but in absence, of curiosity, of mutual support, of shared dreams. We became two individuals occupying the same space rather than partners building a life together. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when Kelly had entered the picture. She'd been hired as Darren's executive assistant approximately 2 years ago, shortly after he finally secured the regional director position he'd coveted for so long. Initially, I'd thought nothing of his frequent mentions of her efficiency and organizational skills. "Kelly managed to reschedule the entire quarterly review in under an hour," he'd report over dinner. "She's exactly what I needed to maintain momentum." Gradually, dinner conversations about Kelly increased, while actual dinners with me decreased. Late nights at the office became routine, always justified by important projects that couldn't wait. Until morning. Weekend work sessions grew more frequent, always framed as necessary sacrifices for his career advancement. I wasn't naive, but I was patient, perhaps too patient. I noticed the signs but chose to focus on my own path forward rather than confronting what was increasingly obvious. Part of me had already begun detaching from the relationship, recognizing that its foundation had eroded beyond repair. The night I overheard them in Darren's office simply confirmed what I'd suspected for months. Their affair wasn't just personal. Betrayal. It was the culmination of a pattern established years earlier. Darren had always valued people based on their usefulness to his ambitions. I had outlived my usefulness in his eyes. Kelly represented a newer, more advantageous alliance. What neither of them realized was that I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. Not the specific betrayal, but the necessity of standing on my own strength when partnerships failed. My grandmother had taught me to build layers of protection, to maintain independence even within commitments, to always have options beyond the obvious path. As I finalized the acquisition strategy for Meridian in the weeks following my discovery of their affair, I wasn't driven by vengeance, but by opportunity. The convergence of personal betrayal and professional opening provided perfect clarity. The compartmentalization I'd maintained throughout our marriage, keeping my true financial status and professional capabilities hidden, had become unnecessary. It was time to step fully into my own power, without apology or accommodation. The why. Morning after Darren and Kelly left my office in disgrace, I arrived at Meridian headquarters before sunrise. The building was nearly empty, just security and a few ambitious analysts preparing for early meetings. I preferred these quiet hours for strategic thinking, another habit inherited from my grandmother, who claimed dawn brought clarity that no other time of day could match. My new office still felt foreign, though Penelope had already arranged it to my specifications. Photographs of my parents and grandmother sat on a side table, not prominently displayed but present as silent witnesses to this pivotal moment in our family's legacy. I opened my laptop and reviewed the integration plan I'd developed for merging Westbrook's operations into Meridian's structure. The document represented weeks of careful analysis, identifying redundancies, recognizing talent worth retaining, and mapping a path forward that would maximize strengths while minimizing disruption. What I needed now was a trusted team to execute this vision. Darren's department would require immediate attention. His leadership style had created a culture of corner-cutting and favoritism that would undermine Meridian's values if left unchecked. Paige Morris was already positioned to take over, but she would need deputies untainted by association with the previous regime. I pulled up personnel files, focusing on mid-level managers at both Westbrook and Meridian, who had demonstrated integrity and competence despite being overlooked for promotion. These would be my allies in reshaping the organization, people who understood the business but hadn't benefited from the broken system. At 7:30 a.m., Finn arrived with coffee and bagels, part of our morning ritual during major projects. You look surprisingly well-rested for someone who just executed a corporate and personal coup, he observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. Decisive action is energizing, I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. And I slept better last night than I have in months. I spoke with Connor this morning. Apparently Darren signed everything without calling an attorney. Pride before prudence, as usual. I nodded, unsurprised. He's always believed he could handle any situation through sheer force of personality. That confidence served him well until yesterday, and Kelly, already trying to spin her departure as a voluntary resignation. She called Archie from security this morning, asking him to provide a reference that omits the circumstances of her termination. Finn raised an eyebrow. Bold move. Predictable, I corrected. People like Kelly always believe rules are negotiable, which is precisely why our first priority is establishing that Meridian operates differently. I shared my screen, showing him the integration timeline I'd developed. Phase 1 begins today. A company-wide announcement about the acquisition and leadership changes, followed by departmental meetings to address immediate concerns. You're not wasting any time, Finn noted, studying the aggressive schedule. Uncertainty breeds anxiety. The sooner everyone understands the path forward, the faster we can rebuild momentum. We spent the next hour refining communication strategies for different stakeholder groups, executives, middle management, frontline employees, clients, and investors. Each required a tailored message that acknowledged concerns while establishing confidence in the transition. At 9 a.m., Connor joined us, bringing the final version of the all-staff announcement. Legal has reviewed everything. We're clear to proceed whenever you're ready. I scanned the document, making minor edits to emphasize continuity for clients while signaling internal change. Send this at 9:30. Schedule departmental meetings beginning at 11 SAUs, starting with Darren's former team. Connor nodded, making notes. How do you want to handle questions about your relationship to Darren? People will inevitably connect the dots. Transparency without detail, I replied. Acknowledge that yes, Darren Wellington is my soon-to-be ex-husband. Yes, he has accepted a position in our Seattle office. No, I did not participate in decisions regarding his role due to obvious conflicts of interest. Then redirect to the broader integration strategy. And if they press for more, personal details? They won't, Finn interjected. Not to her face anyway. Let them speculate, I said with a shrug. Office gossip has a short shelf life. By next week, there will be new rumors to entertain them. As Connor left to finalize the announcement, Paige Richardson arrived for our scheduled strategy session. At 65, she brought decades of experience navigating complex corporate transitions. The board is impressed with your handling of the situation, she said after settling into a chair. Particularly the decision to reassign Darren rather than terminate him outright. It demonstrates maturity and strategic thinking. Firing him would have created a martyr, I explained. Demoting him creates an example. Paige smiled approvingly. Exactly. Now, about the client retention strategy. For the next hour, we dissected potential vulnerabilities in our client relationships, particularly those Darren had personally cultivated. His charm had secured several major accounts, and we needed to ensure those relationships transferred smoothly to new account managers. The Jefferson account is particularly concerning, Paige noted. Given the inflated projections Darren presented, they may have unrealistic expectations about returns. I've already scheduled a meeting with their CEO for tomorrow, I replied. Full transparency about the situation is our best approach. They'll appreciate honesty more than false promises. By 10:30 a.m., my leadership team had assembled in the conference room. Finn, Connor, Paige Morris, who would oversee Darren's former department, and Archie Sullivan, newly promoted from security to head of operational integrity, a position I'd created specifically to address the cultural issues at Westbrook. Before we begin departmental meetings, I said, standing at the head of the table, I want to be absolutely clear about our priorities during this transition. First, we protect our clients by ensuring service continuity. Second, we retain talented employees regardless of their former reporting structure. Third, we establish a unified culture based on integrity, transparency, and accountability. I distributed folders containing detailed action plans for each department. These are your roadmaps for the next 90 days. I expect daily progress reports and immediate flagging of any issues that could impact client relationships or employee retention. Archie raised his hand. What about resistance from Westbrook executives who were aligned with Darren? Some of them won't transition easily to the new structure. Identify them quickly, I instructed. Offer clear expectations and support for meeting those expectations. Those who adapt will thrive. Those who don't will be offered the same choice, Darren. Received, reassignment, or resignation. As the team reviewed their materials, my phone buzzed with a text from Darren. We need to talk. This isn't over. I showed the message to Connor, who frowned. He signed a non-disparagement agreement yesterday. Any attempt to undermine the transition would violate those terms. He's testing boundaries, I replied, typing a response. All communication should go through legal counsel moving forward. Congratulations on your Seattle position. I turned my phone face down on the table, refocusing on the team before me. Any questions before we begin departmental meetings? Paige Morris looked up from her folder. How do we address the inevitable rumors about why Darren was reassigned? His allies will claim it was personal rather than performance-based. Evidence speaks louder than rumors, I replied. Make the Jefferson account files available to the senior team. The numbers tell the story we need told. With that final direction, we adjourned to prepare for the cascade of meetings that would shape Meridian's future. As my team filed out, I remained at the table, reviewing my notes for the crucial first meeting with Darren's former department. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Darren. I ignored it, focusing instead on the task ahead. Yesterday had been about personal reckoning. Today was about building something better from the ashes of what had failed. Strategy, preparation, execution. The principles my grandmother had taught me would guide Meridian through this transition, just as they had guided me through the collapse of my marriage. The auditorium hummed with nervous energy as employees from both Meridian and Westbrook filled the seats. News of the acquisition had spread quickly following the official announcement, along with rumors about dramatic leadership changes. Many Westbrook employees wore expressions of barely concealed anxiety. Meridian staff displayed cautious optimism, mixed with curiosity. I stood backstage, reviewing my notes one final time while Paige Richardson addressed the audience with a brief overview of the acquisition's strategic benefits. Her steady voice carried through the speakers, establishing the tone of calm authority we'd agreed was essential. And now, Paige concluded, I'd like to introduce Meridian Global's new Chief Executive Officer, who will guide us through this transition and beyond. Please welcome Stephanie Wellington. As I walked onto the stage, the applause was polite, but tentative. Most employees from either company had never seen me before today. Those from Westbrook who recognized me looked confused. They knew me only as Darren's wife, occasionally present at company functions but otherwise largely invisible in their professional world. Thank you, Paige, I began, taking position at the podium. Today marks not just the merger of two companies, but the beginning of something stronger than either could have become separately. I outlined the integration timeline, emphasizing, Continuity for clients and growth opportunities for talented employees regardless of their original company. Without mentioning Darren directly, I addressed the elephant in the room. You may have heard that some leadership changes have already taken place. These decisions were based on thorough performance evaluations and alignment with our core values: integrity, accountability, and transparency. These values will guide all decisions moving forward. From the third row, I spotted Archie nodding slightly as I emphasized the new cultural priorities. Beside him, several of Darren's former allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Change brings uncertainty, I acknowledged, but it also brings opportunity. In the coming days, each department will meet with transition teams to address specific questions and concerns. My door is open to anyone with ideas for improving our integration process. As the presentation concluded and employees filed out, for department-specific breakout sessions, I noticed a cluster of Westbrook managers huddled in urgent conversation. Their sideways glances in my direction suggested the topic was personal rather than professional. The office grapevine was clearly operating at full capacity. Finn appeared at my side as I gathered my notes. Impressive speech, clear but not threatening, firm but not dictatorial. How's the reception from Darren's former team? Mixed, he replied honestly. Some are relieved. Apparently, his management style had grown increasingly erratic in recent months. Others are loyal and suspicious. One called it a palace coup orchestrated by a vengeful wife. I shrugged, unsurprised. They'll judge based on actions, not rumors. Results matter more than narratives. As we walked toward the executive conference room for the next meeting, Penelope intercepted us with a tablet displaying an email that had just been sent to the entire leadership team. "You should see this immediately," she said, her expression concerned. The email was from Darren, sent from his personal account rather than his company address, which had already been deactivated per protocol. The subject line read, "The truth about Stephanie Wellington." The message itself was brief but pointed. Before embracing Stephanie's leadership, you should know she orchestrated this takeover through deliberate deception and hidden conflicts of interest. Her family connections and secret financial stake in Wells Financial were concealed from Westbrook's board during acquisition discussions. I urge senior leadership to demand full investigation before proceeding further. Supporting documents attached. The attachment was a scatter of financial records showing my inheritance of Wells Financial, public information that anyone could have accessed, though few had reason to connect it to me, given my use of my grandmother's surname in that context. "He's violating his non-disparagement agreement," Connor observed, reading over my shoulder. "This gives us grounds for immediate termination." "No," I replied, surprising both Finn and Connor. "Let him have this tantrum. Responding would only validate his claims and extend the drama." "What about the accusations?" Finn asked. "Some may believe there's a legitimate concern about disclosure. Paige and the board were fully informed of my connection to Wells before my appointment," I reminded him. "Everything was properly disclosed where it mattered. Darren's attempting to create a conspiracy where there was only strategic privacy." I handed the tablet back to Penelope. "Monitor responses, but don't engage. If anyone raises concerns directly, refer them to Paige for confirmation that all appropriate disclosures were made during the acquisition process." As we continued to the conference room, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Darren's desperate attempt to undermine me had stripped away the last pretense between us. The power had shifted completely. His email wasn't the desperate act of a betrayed husband, but of a dethroned executive who had finally realized he was no longer the protagonist. In his own story, the curtain had fallen on our marriage. Now the real work began. Darren's attempt to rally opposition through his email fell flat. By mid-afternoon, the message had been acknowledged, but effectively dismissed by most of the leadership team. Paige Richardson had responded with a brief, factual clarification, confirming that all appropriate disclosures had been made during the acquisition and appointment process. The professional response only highlighted the contrast between Meridian's new culture of measured transparency and Darren's emotional outburst. Several Westbrook executives who had initially hesitated to commit to the new structure now approached me after departmental meetings, eager to demonstrate their alignment with the changing tide. As the day progressed, Darren's digital presence grew increasingly desperate. His email to me was filled with accusations and ultimatums. "This isn't over. I've contacted industry journalists about the conflicts of interest. Either reverse my reassignment or prepare for public scrutiny." Connor advised an immediate legal response. "This crosses from personal grievance into potential corporate damage. We should have outside counsel contact him directly." "Not yet," I replied, studying the message. "He's escalating because he's being ignored. Let's see how far he's willing to go before we engage." By late afternoon, Darren had moved from threats to bargaining. His next message struck a markedly different tone. "We should discuss this privately. 10 years of marriage deserves better than corporate warfare. Meet me for dinner, and we can find a resolution that works for both of us." I showed the message to Finn, who shook his head in disbelief. Classic Darren. When intimidation fails, try charm. "It always worked before," I noted. "People yielded when he pushed, softened when he smiled. He's cycling through tactics that have proven successful in the past." I drafted a simple response. "All communication should continue through official channels. Your reassignment details have been finalized with HR." Darren's final message arrived just as I was concluding the day's meetings. No threats, no charm, just raw emotion finally breaking through. "Was any of it real? Did you ever love me? Or was I just part of your grandmother's revenge against Westbrook?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was particularly insightful, but because it revealed how completely Darren had misunderstood our entire relationship. Even now, he saw himself as the victim of an elaborate plot rather than the architect of his own downfall. I closed the email without responding. Some questions didn't deserve answers, particularly when they were designed to reframe accountability as victimhood. As I gathered my belongings to leave, Paige knocked on my open door. Seattle office confirmed Darren arrived this afternoon to review his new position. His assistant reports he spent exactly 12 minutes at his desk before leaving, saying he had urgent personal business to attend to. "He won't accept the position," I predicted. "His pride won't allow it. He'll resign by morning, believing it's somehow a victory to walk away rather than accept demotion." Paige nodded in agreement. "And Kelly?" "Already interviewing at our competitors," I replied. "Archie's friend in security at Landmark Financial spotted her there this morning." Some endings were predictable, even when the beginning had been anything but. By the end of the first week, the corporate landscape had shifted dramatically. As predicted, Darren had resigned rather than accept the Seattle position, sending a terse email to HR that cited irreconcilable differences with current leadership. Kelly had secured a position at Landmark Financial, presumably without disclosing the circumstances of her departure from Westbrook. With the most visible antagonists removed from the equation, I could focus on building the alliances necessary for successful integration. This began with identifying employees from both companies who shared my vision for a more ethical, transparent organization. My first recruit was Penelope Wright, a brilliant analyst from Westbrook who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion, despite consistently outperforming her male colleagues. Darren had dismissed her as too cautious when she raised concerns about the Jefferson account projections. "I need someone who understands Westbrook's internal dynamics but isn't compromised by the previous culture," I explained, offering her a position as Director of Integration Strategy. "Someone who values accuracy over expediency." Penelope accepted immediately. "I've been waiting 5 years for leadership that understands the difference between ambitious projections and fictional ones." Next came Connor's recommendation, Paige Morris from Meridian's compliance department, who had developed innovative audit protocols that identified potential problems before they became actual violations. I appointed her to oversee Darren's former department, with a mandate to implement those same protocols throughout the merged organization. The team may resist initially, I warned her during our first strategy session. They're accustomed to Darren's approach of addressing problems, only when they become unavoidable. Resistance is expected, Paige replied confidently, but results speak for themselves. Once they see how preventative compliance actually makes their jobs easier, they'll adapt. From Westbrook's technology division, I recruited Archie Donovan, who had repeatedly flagged security vulnerabilities that Darren had deemed too expensive to address. His new role as Chief Information Security Officer came with both resources and authority to implement the protections he'd long advocated. "You were right about the server encryption," I told him during our first meeting, referencing a proposal Darren had rejected the previous year. "Implement it immediately, along with any other measures you consider necessary." Archie's surprise quickly gave way to determination. "You've actually read my security proposals?" "Everyone," I confirmed, "including your prescient warnings about potential data breaches that were dismissed as alarmist." By week's end, my core team consisted of 12 executives, 7 from Meridian and 5 from Westbrook, each selected for both competence and character. Together, we represented a new alliance based not on loyalty to individuals, but commitment to principles. During our first integration summit, Finn observed the transformed dynamic with satisfaction. "You've built in 2 weeks what Darren couldn't. Establish in 10 years, a team that functions on mutual respect rather than fear or favoritism." The foundation was in place. Now we could begin building something better than either company had been separately. 1 month after taking over as CEO, I sat at my desk reviewing quarterly projections when Penelope's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Wellington, Darren is in the lobby demanding to see you. Security has asked how you'd like to proceed." I glanced at the calendar, noting we were finalizing the Jefferson account corrections today. The timing wasn't coincidental. "Have Archie escort him up," I decided, "and ask Connor to join us." 10 minutes later, Darren strode into my office, his appearance noticeably different from when I'd last seen him. His designer suit had been replaced by more casual attire, and the confident posture that had once defined him seemed diminished. "You've destroyed everything I built," he said without preamble, ignoring Connor's presence by the window. "Jefferson is pulling their account because of your reassessment of the projections. Jefferson is maintaining their relationship with Meridian," I corrected calmly. "They've simply adjusted their expectations based on accurate projections, rather than fictional ones. Those projections were ambitious, not fictional." Darren's voice rose with frustration. "That's how business works. You set aggressive targets and push to meet them." "There's a difference between ambition and fraud," Connor interjected. "The numbers you presented weren't just optimistic. They were mathematically impossible given the market conditions." Darren turned to him with a dismissive gesture. "This isn't about numbers. This is personal. She's systematically dismantling everything I created because I had an affair." "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "That. This is about Kelly, not about the falsified performance metrics, the nepotistic hiring practices, or the compliance shortcuts that put client assets at risk." "You had no problem with my methods when they benefited us both," he countered. "Now suddenly you're the champion of corporate ethics? Please." I studied him for a moment, recognizing that beneath the anger was something more fundamental, the desperate need to reframe his failures as someone else's vendetta. "Darren, why are you here? You resigned your position. You've retained counsel for the divorce. What exactly do you hope to accomplish with this conversation?" His expression shifted, the anger giving way to something that almost resembled vulnerability. "I want to understand when everything changed. When did you stop being my wife and start being this?" He gestured vaguely toward my office, my position, my transformation. The question deserved a thoughtful answer, not for his sake, but for my own clarity. "I was always both," I said finally. "You just never bothered to see the complete person you married. You preferred the version that reflected your own ambitions." Archie appeared at the door, signaling that our time was up. "Your new employer called," I added as Darren turned to leave. "Landmark wants to verify your employment dates. I instructed HR to provide only the facts, your positions and tenure. Nothing more, nothing less. It was a small kindness, one he didn't deserve, but that I offered anyway. Not for his benefit, but as a final release from the bitterness that had no place in my new beginning." 3 months after the acquisition, Meridian Global hosted a client appreciation event at the city's Botanical Gardens. The evening embodied the transformed company culture, elegant without being ostentatious, impressive yet approachable, exactly the balance I'd envisioned. As I circulated among clients and employees, the contrast between this gathering and Westbrook's former events was striking. Gone were the excessive displays of wealth that had characterized Darren's approach to client relations. Instead, meaningful conversations about financial goals and strategic partnerships dominated the evening. The Jefferson account representatives, who had nearly withdrawn during the transition, now engaged enthusiastically with their new advisory team. "Refreshing to work with people who tell us what we need to hear, not just what we want to hear," their CFO commented as we discussed their portfolio adjustments. Paige Morris approached with a tablet displaying the latest quarterly results. "First, combined reports are ready for review," she said, her satisfaction evident. "Revenue is tracking 4% above projections. Conservative, accurate projections." I scanned the figures, noting with particular satisfaction that client retention had exceeded our targets. The feared exodus following Darren's departure had never materialized. Instead, several clients who had left Westbrook under his leadership had returned, citing the improved transparency and communication. "The compliance upgrades are complete too," Archie added, joining our conversation. "System-wide implementation. Finished yesterday, 2 weeks ahead of schedule." These achievements represented more than operational success. They validated the fundamental premise of our integration, that excellence and ethics could coexist, that sustainable growth required both ambition and accountability. Moving through the garden's illuminated pathways, I found Finn conversing with Penelope near a fountain. "Discussing the expansion proposal," he explained as I joined them. "Penelope has identified 3 potential acquisition targets that align with our revised growth strategy. Smaller firms with strong fundamentals and ethical leadership," Penelope elaborated. "Not the flashiest options, but the ones with genuine synergy potential." The approach perfectly captured our new philosophy: substance over appearance, long-term, value over quick wins, genuine partnership over exploitation. It was everything Westbrook could have been had different values guided its development. Later that evening, as the event concluded successfully, I stood alone briefly on the garden terrace, reflecting on the transformation of the past quarter. The company that had emerged from the merger bore little resemblance to either predecessor. We had retained the best elements of both while discarding the practices that had limited their potential. Similarly, my own transformation had been profound. The compartmentalization I'd maintained throughout my marriage, separating personal from professional, ambition from relationship, had given way to integration. For the first time, I could bring my complete self to both my work and my personal interactions. The strategic patience my grandmother had taught me had served its purpose, but now gave way to strategic authenticity. As I prepared to return to the remaining guests, Finn joined me on the terrace, offering a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," he proposed. I raised my glass in agreement. "And to building something better." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.